Hello and welcome to the COGIT podcast series. My name is Anthony Richards and I'm the editorial director of COGIT. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Petter Nesser. Petter is a senior researcher at the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment's Terrorism Research Group, and he has conducted extensive research on European jihadism. He is also the author of the acclaimed Islamist Terrorism in Europe, which was published through Hearst in 2015. Petter, many thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I suppose my first question, Petter, in the chapter that you kindly contributed to our volume on jihadist terror, you wrote as part of what you call the ISIS effect of the potential exploitation of refugee streams. To what extent do you think refugee flows are potentially facilitators of the contemporary international terrorist threat today?
Well, that's a difficult question. I guess the answer would be that refugee streams can have impact on the international terrorist threats under certain circumstances, right? And it's no new insight from conflict studies that the movement of refugees across borders can be a factor in causing like a spillover of political conflicts. We have seen that from many historical cases, for instance, in the Middle East with the movement of Palestinian refugees into to countries such as Jordan and Lebanon. And causing political conflicts or being a factor in causing political conflicts. When it comes to international terrorism and jihadism, in the case of IS, this was a factor in the IS terrorist wave of 2014 to 2017. It's kind of a difficult subject to research because it's kind of a taboo. It's a delicate matter because of the risk of stigmatizing people, refugees in a vulnerable situation. At the same time, it was an important aspect, an important tactical aspect of what happened with the jihadi threat to Europe in that period. So we did some research at the FFI where we, my institution, the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment, where we run this data set of jihadi terrorist plotting in Western Europe ever since the 1990s. And this database includes not only launched terrorist attacks but also foiled plots. So one of the things we registered were the involvement of at least one person referred to in the sources as a refugee or an asylum seeker, just to see what were the proportions in terms of plots involving at least one person, with characterized as such, and plots that weren't. Which the result was that there were quite a few plots. I mean, I think we counted some 38 plots of a total of 227 well-documented plots for the whole period. I mean, for the whole data set. So this will be like 16% of the cases, and most of these cases were after 2015. There were some examples also before that, but this is mainly a thing characterizing the threat from 2015 onwards. About half of those were foiled. So, and well-known cases include, for instance, the 2015 November Bataclan attacks in France, where IS used European foreign fighters disguised as refugees to complete the attacks. Also, cases like the truck attack in Stockholm in 2017 with Akilo, and some cases in Germany, and also cases like the Parsons Green attack in the UK. So there were quite a few cases which indicated to us that this was something that IS exploited tactically, and why wouldn't they? Right? That's the other question we need to ask. If you are a terrorist group wanting to export a terrorist threat to Europe to achieve some aims, which is what the group wanted. I mean, they were very clear about it. They wanted to deter further Western intervention and the fight against IS by the coalition. If you are the terrorist group and want to extend this threat and launch attacks in Europe, why would you not use that opportunity to either disguise people as refugees or try to recruit among refugees, which is what they did, and succeeded to some extent. And then, of course, these are, I mean, terrorism is a small n phenomenon. There are not many terrorist plots and attacks in total, and if you compare, I mean, the influx of refugees that came in that period, totaling more than 1 million, right, to Europe. These are like very small numbers, but still an important aspect that we need to know from a security perspective, and also it's just in the general kind of we need to be open about these developments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting, actually, fascinating overview there. Thank you for that, and for sharing your own research around that in terms of this as a potential a danger. Thank you for that. In the chapter that you wrote, you refer to the jihadist threat as being primarily traced back to conflict zones in the Muslim world, rather than, conversely, internal European affairs. I wonder if you could elaborate further on that point.
Yeah, it was something I wanted to highlight, also because some of the debates surrounding the threat in Europe were very much focused on local explanations. We were looking to disadvantaged suburbs in certain countries, especially, of course, Molenbeek in Belgium, and other places. And there was a lot of focus on socioeconomic factors and lack of integration as kind of drivers and explanations for the threat, basically. Which to me, it did not kind of fit so well with my research. I kind of study this movement, the jihadi movement, more as a transnational phenomenon, originating from local conflicts historically in the Middle East and North Africa, and also, of course, kind of becoming this transnational phenomenon when foreign fighters gathered in Afghanistan during the Arab-Afghan era, during the years following Soviet invasion. And also the era when Al Qaeda was established from 1988 and onwards, and of course, when you look at what these movements and groups and networks write, what they say in their statements and how they act, it becomes very clear that their main goal is to topple local regimes and establish proto-states and ultimately re-establish the historical Islamic Caliphate, right? That's kind of the ideological background, and then or Al Qaeda defined the strategy of striking the far enemy first, right? Giving kind of starting the campaign that was initiated primarily by the 9/11 attacks and everything that happened since. So for me, it's just not this kind of attempt to try to explain when and where terrorist cells will occur based on like local factors and socio-economic factors and all the things. I don't think that really will tell us so much about that question, right? My research is very specialized, focusing on the network dynamics and when and where plots occur, right? And for that purpose, these local explanations cannot take me very far.
That's very interesting, Petter, because yes, I see in the chat you kind of made the case that the threat has primarily external drivers. But do you think?
Let me just add.
Yes, go ahead.
If we had a situation where local drivers and factors such as failed integration, suburb problems, and things like that, where a key driver or were highly important in shaping the threat matrix, then we would see, from my point of view, we would see far more attacks in places such as Italy or Sweden, right? Which have quite extensive problems in that domain, and we don't. And this is why I mean, very much of what we see is more kind of ideologically driven, right? When we see that the main contributors to interventions in the Muslim majority countries and the fight against IS are on the top list of targets for these groups.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Petter. Very interesting because, again, I suppose, and you'll be aware of this, there are authors, academic authors out there who perhaps would minimize the impact of the ideological allure of the threat and perhaps place more emphasis on things. I mean, for example, in the UK, some have argued that, we have Islamophobia in this country, we have socioeconomic disparities, we have so-called structural conditions that allow the threat to come into being, in a sense, so that almost in a sense that, this is arguments sometimes made in a sense, at least to some extent, a problem of our own making because of these sort of structural conditions that breed inequality. I mean, do you think there's a role for this at all in terms of trying to determine the reasons for the threat?
Absolutely, there is a role. Of course, these are contributing factors, and they affect some kind of elements of the threat, right? But not the most the most important ones, and not the ones calling the shots, right? Which is why I kind of came up with this typology of militants among the people that I studied, right, when I was looking at terrorist cell formation. I kind of divided them into entrepreneurs, misfits, and drifters, which are the main categories, and they reflect kind of different drivers and different pathways into jihadism. Where you have the entrepreneurs, the ones who are kind of in charge and are ideological and tie the whole thing together transnationally. they are to a large extent driven by ideology, whereas the misfits, they kind of join for more personal reasons, more reasons that have to do with socioeconomic and social failure or problems and things like that. So for them, it becomes kind of a process of finding some meaning and kind of gain a better place for themselves. Perhaps also kind of redirect a criminal career or something, some problems that they've had in their lives. So that becomes kind of the main thing for them. Whereas the last category are the drifters, and they mainly join for social reasons, social obligations, social pressures, social rewards. So for them, of course, in this perspective, there is a role for all the things you mentioned, right? But still not. But at the same time, if you fixed all these things tomorrow, there would still be terrorist plotting, right? There would still be enough people that the entrepreneurs could recruit to have their plans kind of materialize.
Yes, indeed. And I guess this is all part of what you would describe as the sort of the networked nature underpinning the jihadist threat. And I wonder in this context, because I know you've discussed this in your chapter 2, I wonder if you could elaborate on the role of Anjem Chowdhury in particular, and the impact that he has had in terms of underpinning the threat.
I mean, both he and his mentor, Umar Bakri, played very important roles in kind of mobilizing the second generation of European jihadism. The younger generation and the more multinational generation, and to many, to a large extent, also a more Europeanized jihadi movement in Europe. And they were at least underestimated as kind of drivers or entrepreneurs of this broader mobilization, because they were seen as because of their appearance. Basically, they were seen as, and also talked about as clowns or something like that. But I mean, these are highly ideological people, orators, excellent recruiters, charismatic leaders, and they have had a major role in kind of building a viable activist base from the UK, which I see as the nerve center of European jihadism. Many people, think that this is mainly a French problem, but for me, the UK is at the core because of the history, because of the mobilization among kind of jihadi activists in the UK from the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s and in the early 2000s, right? I think Anjem Chowdhury's role as a leader of Islam for UK or the various spin-off groups from Al Muhajirun was highly important in terms of spreading these networks across Europe, and also for the mobilization for the foreign fighting in Syria. I don't, for instance, think that we will have a phenomenon such as jihadism in the Nordic countries absent people like him. It's about people from Norway, Sweden, Denmark going to the UK on study trips, meeting these people, going to meetings, going and things like that. Connecting with them via various online apps, Pal Talk in the old days. All kinds of new apps in newer times. But also like travels. He came, to Norway in connection with the trial of Mullah Krekar, the Norwegian jihadi militant Islamist preacher and former leader of Al-Islam. During his trial, and activists gathered from several Nordic countries during this event, networking, becoming part of this transnational phenomenon. So I think that people like him, and of course also Omar Bakri, have been highly important in terms of recruiting and socializing the new generation.
Yeah, thank you, Petter. You mentioned the UK being a bit of a nerve centre or a hub for the emergence of this threat in the late 1980s, 1990s. How do you account for that? Is it just because the UK was very late in dealing with this, or underestimated the problem, or why is it the UK became the sort of nerve centre for this activity?
Here comes again, the kind of network dynamics interpretation of things, because during the 1990s there was this critical mass of influential people who were able to settle in the UK. Some of them as refugees, legitimate refugees, because they were persecuted, right, in their home countries. So this is also, part of the problem that these people came with very legitimate, had very legitimate causes for getting protection. And they were kind of using European countries and the UK in particular as a support base and a place for fundraising, propaganda, recruitment, and also supporting the various militant groups operating in the regions and in different parts of the world. But the role of the UK, I'm really not sure. These networks were allowed to operate quite freely in all over Europe. I don't think the UK stood out in particular, but I remember there were some criticisms from France, back in those days, where they referred to some French people working with security referred to the UK as London is down, right? Because of this collection of militant figures and that they were allowed to operate relatively freely. But this was the case all over the region, I think, and it really came after the latest wave when we saw IS becoming a huge threat in Europe.
A final question for you, if I may, Petter. You in your work, and you've been talking about entrepreneurs here today, you've emphasized in your work the importance of targeting networks and entrepreneurs and severing their connections. How would you suggest going about this in an effective way?
Well, that's a very difficult question. So, and I'm not an expert on countermeasures as such, but I think that we had to see a change in Europe from the policies that were dominating in the 1990s and the 2000s, and somewhere more in the direction of what we see today. A calibration toward tougher measures against these groups, but it's difficult because there should also be a debate about to what extent one should pursue, of course, these measures of surveillance and such in democratic countries, right? There's a limit, and we have to be careful not to go past that limit, right? I've seen some criticisms against the so-called TPIMs, terrorism prevention investigation measures in the UK, in the context of measures against Mujahideen people. I'm not sure where I stand on this. I think that when we are talking about real entrepreneurs who are, ideologically committed and will never change, in a sense, we need to have quite tough measures in place. We need to spend resources on keeping these people from recruiting, and that involves relatively tough measures, right? But there should always be a debate about how far we should go on this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Combating Jihadist Terror. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more episodes, they're available to watch on our website, cogit.org, or to listen to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thanks again.